Have you checked out the Somebody You Love Patreon yet?
For just $3 a month, you can get every episode without ads and you get them a day early.
For $6 a month, you get all of our bloopers and behind-the-scenes action.
For $10 a month, you get monthly bonus episodes.
And for $20 a month, you also get the bonus episodes as videos.
You can cancel anytime, and when you sign up, you get access to everything that we've posted so far.
We also have annual subscriptions where you save 10% and get 1 month free.
Patreon.com/somebodyyoupod, as in podcast.
You do have to type in the URL because Patreon hides 18 plus creators from the search, so you most likely won't be able to find us by searching. That's patreon.com/somebodyyoupod. Welcome to Somebody You Love, or The Sale of Two Titties. I'm Jenna Love.
And I'm Holly Hart.
And we're experts in disappointing our parents, breaching community guidelines, and banging the people who vote against our rights. Before we get into today's show, we'd just like to take a moment to talk about the traditional custodians of the land on which we are recording. Holly is on Ngunnawal land, and I am on Darug and Gundungurra land. We would like to extend our respect to any elders, past or present, who may be listening, and we acknowledge that sovereignty of this land was never ceded.
Kaytlin Bailey is a contrarian by nature and a provocateur by trade. She is an internationally touring stand-up comic, sex worker rights advocate and writer. She came out as a sex worker in 2015 with her critically acclaimed one-woman show Contagious, which sold out performances at New York Fringe and United Solo Theatre festivals in New York City in 2016.
What a name. That's such a good name for a show. Brilliant. Contagious. Oh, phenomenal. Kaytlin started the Oldest Profession podcast in 2017 to make sex worker stories from history more accessible. In 2018, she got back into politics as the Director of Communications for Decriminalised Sex Work to challenge laws criminalising the oldest profession. In 2020, Bailey founded Old Pros, where she continues her stubborn crusade against whorephobia. Her second one-woman show, Whore's Eye View, another brilliant name, is in development. Hello, Kaytlin. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted and privileged to be here.
Thank you for staying up late for us. We've got another fun, different time zone guest. So
thank you. I am solidly middle-aged now after the culture shock of the pandemic. So 10 p.m. is, in fact, pretty close to my bedtime, actually.
Yeah,
so,
fair enough.
You're getting a worn-out me, but thanks. It's still lovely to be here.
Well, it's midday, and that's first thing in the morning for Holly. So
yeah. At best, it's 3 a.m. quality for me. This is early morning. First up, Kaytlin, tell us your history. How did you end up in the sex industry, and what kind of sex work do you have experience in? Take us back.
Yeah, I mean, I came to sex work the way that I came to every job that I've ever had, which was with a lot of privilege, right? So I was sort of drawn to sex work, the stories that I knew about sex work. I was raised, I came of age under the Bush administration's like abstinence-only education program in the U.S., and so I felt that I was being lied to, right, about my body, about my relationship to sex and value, if that makes sense. Like something that they don't, advertise about the abstinence-only sort of programming or conditioning is that it does make you think about your body in a very mercurial sort of like objectified way, right? Of like, how do I maximize the value of this? How do I diminish the value of this, right? Like you don't want to trade your virginity like for, so that sort of fed into this soup of deep curiosity and a kind of longing, and I felt very drawn to sex work, and so I jumped on the internet back when you can do that, and I Googled escort Raleigh, North Carolina, and I found this really incredible FAQ that was very centered on sex worker safety and community. It talked about a screening process and sort of a culture of protection and, proactive consent, like long before, right, the rest of the country was having this conversation. This is like 2004, 2005. And like, I remember just being really impressed, like with the system. And I skulked the site for a few weeks and, finally got up the nerve to open up my own email address and post my own ad, and started seeing clients, which was like way more fun than the anxiety-inducing does he or does he not like me from biology situation that was happening at school. It felt great to be like, I would like to pay you money to spend time and worship your body. And I was like, thank you, sir. I also think that this is, people have been sleeping on the goods and services that I have to offer. And so I had a fine, uneventful time as a full service hourly escort in North Carolina in the late 2000s. Then I sort of made a vow to myself of like, okay, I did it. I survived, right? I will never speak of this again because this will compromise all of my political ambitions, right? I knew I wanted to get into politics. I knew I wanted to write. I knew I wanted to do all of these other things. And I knew about, sex worker stigma. I was like, these people are wrong, right? They believe all kinds of things that aren't true. But like, I accept that I have done an unspeakable thing and will move forward in my life not speaking of this thing. Graduated college, got into politics at a very depressing time. I don't want to presume a U.S. audience, but in 2010, when Obama lost the supermajority in the Senate, was like when I was running around collecting emails talking about how great things could be if we just did things that made sense. But we didn't do that, and so now here we are.
Yep.
No one. If only people listen to me, right? Listen to the 22-year-olds in your life. They're making a lot of good points.
And the women.
And yeah, absolutely. Sex workers, like, we're the Cassandras of history, have been screaming the whole time, actually. So, yeah, I got into politics. I burned out very fast. I got very nihilistic, and I got into stand-up comedy, which is what brought me to sex work for, like, to get my needs met for the first time, right? So the first one was, like, deep curiosity, right? Like, my parents paid all of my bills. I had, it was... as LARPing, right, as a sex worker, which makes it very easy to be very stringent about your screening policies, right? You're just like, no, I'd rather go to this party, actually.
Yeah.
But then, working as a stand-up comic, which pays in drink tickets for the first decade, I had already made the trade of like freedom in exchange for my health insurance, right? I was like, I'll go without health insurance if I can say what I want into microphones. And I did that, but housing insecurity and my the kinds of gigs that I was doing, like, I was babysitting, I was tutoring, I was doing overnight stuff, I was waiting tables, I was, piecing together, right, like the bare minimum of what I needed to make rent, and then like dating for dinner. Like, so it wasn't sustainable. And I got, so that's when I got into sugaring, which is a different kind of sex work, but I definitely think still counts. And it was my skills as an escort that helped me navigate that like kind of treacherous waters. Like things get weird when you take the rules away and you soften those boundaries, right? Like hourly rates are something that everyone can understand, but like, was this wine part of my payment? I cannot pay my rent with it, so you tell me.
Yeah, we've talked before about. I mean, I sort of came into the industry through sugaring. That's how I found it, and very quickly moved on from that. It's not for me. Yes. There is a place for it, but yeah, it's murky. It's murky.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, it's an old game, right? And like blessings unto folks that do it, but it's a different rule book, and it's easy to get chewed up, I think, in that particular arena. So yeah, I did sugaring until I landed my first salaried position as a sex worker rights advocate, and then I got into political fundraising, which I would argue is worse in every imaginable way.
Gosh, you love a challenge.
Yeah.
I don't think you've done anything the easy way. You've really thrown yourself into the most uphill battles. No.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, some would argue can't, I think is a fair and accurate assessment. But yeah, no, I was born into great privilege, and it's an ongoing fight that I have with my parents, right? Of just like, why can't you just, it would be so nice if you got into gardening or like any number of hobbies.
Yeah. I think we've had the same debates with our parents as well. Yeah. Definitely. In what ways is political fundraising worse?
Well, sex workers get paid up front, and political fundraisers don't. Right? It's all money for feelings. But with sex workers, I think at least in most capacities, right? And sugaring can get a little gray or whatever, are recognized as service providers, right? Whereas political fundraising, you are trying to balance, right, your role as, like a narcissistic supply, companion guide in like this new arena, which are all sex worker skills, right? With this projected image of like incredible professional competency and kind of like a cold, calculated ability to make strategic choices. And so it gets real gnarly when you don't really know what role you're playing in different moments. And if you get that wrong, like there's no law, like no one has to give you money, right? And so when you become, sort of like dependent on large donors, it's similar to sex work in the game as like in the game of like what does the client want, and it's different in that like they want different things, right? Like it's not a blowjob to completion. It's like you got to put the right spreadsheet with the right graph and the right sentence, and it's like it's different, Like, did you or did you not come? I don't,
Yeah, I mean, I have that problem sometimes, but but it sounds messy. It sounds. Yeah. I mean, I really like things to be very clear and know exactly what's expected of me, and that is obviously not there.
And that's the weight is the power differential that is awkward to acknowledge while balancing, and like no one hands you a rule book or a script or is like, I mean, some foundations do, right? But like the game of individual donors is a little bit different because you're, it's similar to clients of like, what do they want? But don't ask them because they won't tell you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gosh. Yeah. The mental labor sounds exhausting. When people talk about things like this, I'm like, I'm so glad it's just me and one or maybe two other people working out dynamics really explicitly, as Jenna just said.
Yep.
Like that's, oh, gosh, I needed that reality check today. Tell us what Old Pros is all about.
Yeah, thank you. So Old Pros, we are a nonprofit media organization creating the conditions to change the status of sex workers in society, right? And so we focus on decriminalization, right, which is changing the legal status, but we're doing that using sort of culture change mechanisms, right? So we want to change the story about sex work. And I started Old Pros really after leaving my role at Decriminalize Sex Work. I worked as the communications director for a couple of years, and I spent 2 years traveling the country talking to legislators about why arresting consensual adults for engaging in consensual sexual activity is like best case scenario a waste of taxpayer dollars, right? And so and what I found is that legislators to an extent were really willing to go with me on that, but they were terrified of their own constituency, and they were very, very susceptible to the siren call of the Nordic model or legalization, where it's like, oh yeah, great, we'll legalize sex work, we'll force everyone to do an STI test, we'll make that publicly accessible, you'll be on a list forever, what could possibly go wrong? And so I realized that like we aren't going to get anywhere good legislatively on this topic or anything else for decades for that matter, with the way that the U.S. political system is going. But aside, right, we're not going to get anywhere good legislatively on this issue unless we really invest in culture change. And so we create content and we are seeking to build and cultivate an audience that is fully armed to push back in the communities that they're already in, right? Like how to bring this up at your barbecue, right? How to talk about this at your next dinner party, right? Like what to say to your aunt that is like, no, Ohio's a trafficking hub on account of the highway, or like whatever. Whatever. That's always the formula, right? It's always some legislator that like, no, this is a hub of trafficking, and then they name a transportation thing that's true about that area. So old pros, we create content, right? We create the Oldest Profession podcast. We funded a lot of projects across the country for like different sex worker artists and advocates to create their own stuff. My second one-woman show, Whore's Eye View, which is 10,000 years of history from a sex worker's perspective, is, being done through old pros. And so we seek out real, thought leaders and people with social, political, and like money capital to try to create experiences that really change people's minds about this, right? So bringing folks in, podcasting is a very intimate art form. Theater experiences, creating parties, live events, and then we get folks connected to our email list and our social media, and we provide a constant drumbeat of sort of like counter programming to like, maybe sex work is fine and imprisoning people is bad. What? Like
revolutionary.
Could you imagine, right?
Wow. Yeah.
Radical. What if so, maybe she's not too young to do sex work, but maybe she is too young to join the army. This and other questions.
Yeah. I think your the stuff that you put out on socials, it's accessible, but it doesn't shy away from the truth and the hard hitting stuff. I think it's a really great balance of yes, I can share this, and I share it all the time. I think but it's not sanitized, and I think that's a really good.
Yeah. We aspire to create content that like you can show your mom, right? Like we want to arm people, empower people with the information and the framing and tools that they have that they can share with their community. And we aim to hit a pretty broad swath, right? Like, we believe that this can appeal to suburban moms, right? We believe that this can appeal to libertarians. We believe that this can appeal to people that understand why abortion rights matter. Like, whoo boy, do we have, great things to say about bodily autonomy and criminalizing bodies, right? So, absolutely. Yeah, it's... and we are sort of like wiggling our way into little niches and going to conferences and trying to be in the room, if that makes sense, as these decisions are being made.
Bloody fantastic. Yeah. I think we've been surprised at the breadth of the audience for our podcast. Like we thought initially going into it, we thought, sex workers will listen to it and clients will listen to it. But I can't believe how we have so many listeners who they don't know much about the sex industry. They're interested maybe in relationships, in intimacy. Yeah. They're just fascinated. I've got like lots of my friends that listen and I go, you don't have to do that just because you're my mate, And they go, no, it's just really interesting. And, and the more civilians, quote unquote, that we can spread the word to, and the more we just get them casually, correcting microaggressions and talking with their friends, bringing it up at lunch, the more, absolutely.
Yeah, sex workers have so much to contribute, right, to conversations at every level. And the cool thing about sex workers is that we are already everywhere, right? We're already on the PTA. We're already in classrooms. We're already in workplaces. We're already literally everywhere. And I think that like helping folks see that, again, it's about creating the conditions, right? Making it just that much easier for folks to come out to their community. If they see folks pushing back, right? If they have deep resources where they can, stand in the great, knowledge and dignity of being part of a long legacy, right? Of folks that are amazing, actually, right? Yes. And so that's a big part of our campaign with the Oldest Profession podcast.
Yeah. So why, I mean, you've touched on it, but why is it important for us to be looking back at the sex workers who have come before us?
Great question. I have found that reclaiming stories from history is really important to do effective advocacy. It's something that legislators are very susceptible to these kinds of reasonings, right? You sort of see it today, right? With the Supreme Court just lying about our nation's history and being like, abortion wasn't a thing until, and it's like, well, you don't know how human history works, right? Let me introduce you to literally any historian. But there is this sort of grasp for legitimacy, I suppose. And I think it also helps people see through some of the bullshit or smoke and mirrors shenanigans that can convince otherwise intelligent people that we can crack down on child sexual exploitation by removing nipples from the internet. You know what I mean? It helps people cut through that when you can look back on the Comstock laws of the 1860s, right? You give somebody 100 years of separation and suddenly it becomes easy to see the racism, right? It's easier to see the moral panic of folks that are not connected to you. And I have too much faith, right, in my fellow, community members' ability to do pattern recognition. But it does feel like we keep having the same conversation over and over again. And so I think it is helpful moving forward to know what those that came before you have said or tried before, whether or not that was effective, who responded to that, right? And it can help you see allies or ways of moving, of just seeing how this played out in the past.
Yeah. Absolutely. History repeats, doesn't it? I mean, that's
unfortunately, yeah, which is a real bummer at parties, right? It's yeah.
Who misses free and affordable ads without all the anti-sex rhetoric?
Assembly 4 is a team of sex workers and technologists based out of Naarm, Australia, who have a specialised understanding of the complex challenges workers face and are dedicated to providing solutions to amplify their voices.
Assembly 4 was founded on the belief that impact is more important than profit. They strongly believe that having the ability to make decisions about our bodies and sexual lives is a fundamental human right. Anyone should be able to make these choices without fear, violence, or discrimination. Sex workers are still fighting for this right.
Tryst.link is a directory that lists thousands of independent adult entertainers, escorts, BDSM, kink, video, massage, and much more. They also have a huge amount of educational resources and blog posts about the sex industry that are well worth a look.
Check out their website assembly4.com, that's for the word, not the number, for more info.
Our listeners can, of course, go and listen to the Oldest Profession podcast to hear brilliant stories about the whores of yore. But could you share a couple of your favourite stories with us, or anything that you think would be very fascinating to our listeners?
Sure. Thank you. I'm obviously a huge fan of the show, and I love nerding out about sex workers from history. It's my favorite topic. And so, yeah, I mean, there are a couple of standout examples. I still feel deeply connected to Victoria Woodhull is a sex worker that we covered in the 3rd season of the show. She was the first woman to run for president.
Wow.
She was, she was incredible. She started a newsletter. She was actually the woman that Anthony Comstock targeted with his obscenity laws. He was specifically trying to shut Victoria Woodhull up. So she is thrown in jail for obscenity and, sort of raked over the press for being an old pro and a very smart one at that. But she became a lecturer.
I feel like I've heard the term Comstock. I don't know if I know what that is.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So this is U.S. history that we then, of course, dutifully exported to civilize the
As
world.
You do. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. We love that, right?
Yeah.
It's not working great
and
here.
we soak it up. It's all good. We take
can export it really fast.
Yeah.
We don't even have to translate. We can just go straight.
Yeah.
So Anthony Comstock was this dude that served in the American Civil War in the 1860s, lived through that ordeal, and came out of it thinking that masturbation was like the biggest national emergency. He shared this obsession with other men. This is the story behind Kellogg's, like the cereal, right? But it was it was a moral panic, right? During this period of time where they were like, our boys are masturbating and giving themselves cancer, and there was nobody to be like, that's not how cancer works.
Yeah.
And so he really wanted to crack down on smut and obscenity, sex workers in particular. And so he really went on this like one-man crusade, and he had that sort of like intense strategic energy, and he got a couple of backers, right, from the capitalist class who also thought that the poor's masturbating was like a bigger national emergency. Up there with unions also having a moment. Culture changes hard. And so that's the guy who ended up deputizing the U.S. mail to make it a criminal crime to send anything that could be construed as pornographic. And then he did one better, which is something that we are still dealing with, which he conflated obscene material with information about contraception generally, or women's bodies in particular.
Yeah,
and so
I read something about that recently. That's still an ongoing issue in the mail.
Yeah, and yes, absolutely. And so like this is going to be a problem now that we've just criminalized abortion in half of the country. Like we have already built the tools with which to to prosecute and censor that and make it actually impossible. So he famously ran the founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, off, and also Victoria Woodhull, and he ran a lot of smart women off the continent, where they fled to England mostly.
Cool. Good time. Let's talk more about people we like. Let's talk more about
people
whores.
we like. Yeah. But I like Victoria Woodhull, right? Because she was a performer, and she was a prolific lecturer. And similar to her, Veronica Franco is another sort of like witty writer woman who lived during the Renaissance, sort of at the height of Venice's publishing empire. And so she, like Victoria Woodhull, right, sort of like started as a sex worker and sort of worked her way up to a courtesan class, and had, wealthy patrons, and was a member of, the intelligentsia of, Venice during this period of time, at a time when well-married women, right, well-born women, were not allowed in public libraries or in any of these public spaces. And so, like, Veronica Franco was a very influential woman during a period where women had no influence. And I think that is a pattern that is like worth seeing and worth recognizing, and something you see over and over again of like just the space and freedom that is opened up when you let go of chastity as being like the metric of a moral life, which is what old pros have given us. Along those lines, one of my favorite stories ever, Qing Shi was objectively, hands down, the greatest pirate who ever lived. She ran shit during the height of the sort of Nassau Caribbean pirate empire that sort of got built. There are a bunch of shows on television right now about that period, but they don't really mention Qing Shi, who was a sex worker from China. She developed a relationship and ended up sort of running off with this like pirate king. He died doing pirate stuff, which was very normal. And then his crew, because of like the semi-democratic process and culture of pirate life, elected her as their leader, and she like quadrupled. I'm making numbers up, but like she grew the force. Like, yeah, like do not quote me on that. Like 10x maybe something. But like she bested the British Navy. She bested the Portuguese Navy. And she forced the Chinese Empire to let her comfortably retire with all of her stuff. Like Qingxi won pirating.
Like,
she got to keep her loot. It was madness. Very eccentric, fun personality, retired to run a gambling house because, how do you stop? But yeah, so it, and I feel like covering sex worker stories from, I have no allegiance, right, to time or place. Not like real historians specialize, right, like in areas. But like,
well, you're specializing, just not in time or place.
Not in time or place, right? And so like I often come to these stories, and you can listen to like sort of earlier episodes where it's like, I wish I had more respect for the cultural context that was happening in. But looking for old prose, there are some things that really don't change, and we are kind of a self-selected group of rule breakers and like edge folks and people who, are, willing and able, even if it wasn't super voluntary, to like bend to social rules. And like, I love hanging out with contrarians. We're the best.
I think what's really one thing that's quite cool, like I have not listened to I haven't listened to many of them actually, but going down the list, there are names on there that you go, oh, were they a sex worker or involved in the sex industry in some way? There are also names where you go, oh yeah, of course they were. So for me, like I'm a bit of a theatre person. I love drag. So the first two names I saw were Gypsy Rose Lee and Dorian Corey. And so Gypsy, of course Gypsy Rose Lee was a sex worker. Of course.
Yes. And also one of the first stand-up comics in the US.
Yes. And did really cool stuff. And I know her story, but we don't like. But it's, I think, the musical Gypsy has definitely, musicals sanitize everything, right?
I mean, yes, that's the genre.
But she's sort of held up as a different thing, and as a bit more of an old Hollywood star or something. And that's not. She is also a sex worker.
So much sex work, right? Like, speaking of old Hollywood stars, right? And, like, blurring those lines, like, Marilyn Monroe was explicitly a sex worker, a, strong self-advocate in many ways, and also part of a system that, like, I mean, like, I think old Hollywood is a really good example of, like, the foundation of sugaring, right? And it's like, if you don't have the ability to explicitly negotiate, right, you're going to get bulldozed. And one of the tools that Marilyn Monroe brought to the table was her ability to negotiate explicitly, and she got that as a sex worker. And so, she started her own production company, and she like stepped into her own power, and then, she was killed by somebody probably. So anyway, So Sylvester Stallone's background in sex work or something that like we don't talk about, even though he was, very, very open about that. And it was sort of a punchline, right? Because it doesn't violate, sort of our gendered expectations. And then Maya Angelou, was, again, another sort of unapologetic person who thought it was really important to talk about her history in sex work. And we still have advocates, right? Sort of willfully or unconsciously skipping over that part.
Definitely. And I think it also, looking at the list of people, and obviously you've not covered everyone, but if you're looking at a list of people ever who have done sex work, right, it really shows the intersectionality. It really shows the different margins that are represented. Like it's really, it says a lot about obviously where the industry has come from, but where the industry is today as well. Why we've all, why solidarity is important. And
absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's important, I remember going into this work, right, from a place, again, of aggressive privilege and sort of like unquenchable curiosity, and I just had to know. And the thesis that I was testing, right, my hypothesis was, if I do this, it will ruin me, right? Like I'll do this thing, right? And then I will become like I hate even sort of like perpetuating these myths, but like like become a heroin addict and become homeless and sort of like no one will want me. I will be exiled and excised from society. And I was taught to believe that was just like a biological process that happened. Like if somebody gave you money and then had sex with you, like you had this mark or this rot or this thing that followed you. And so when I woke up the next morning and like all of my fingers and toes and organs were in the right place, I was like, I proved them wrong. And it was years and decades later before I was like, oh, no. But they do that with they make the lie true with this stigma and these false narratives and the criminalization and the legal consequences and like being kicked out by your landlord or left by your family. And so
it is not the being paid for sex that has those outcomes.
No,
it's
that
everything
part
else
is fine.
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. Unlike, and then I come to this and something that grounds so much of my work as an artist is, I am an only child and I am a soldier's daughter, right? And so I got to see up close what multiple tours of duty and being sort of like the portier of the spear did to my father, who joined the army at 17, and we live in a society that like there's a lot of hero worship, right? There's a lot of investment, right, in this cultural narrative of soldiers as heroes. And we don't often talk about soldiers as being damaged, right, or closed off, or the trauma that comes. And so for me, I thought it was very interesting that everything that I was told would happen to me if I ever chose to do sex work was actually already done to my father, right? Like he's the one waking up in the middle of the night with nightmares.
Yep. And we glorify that,
of course, right? And that juxtaposition, right, is something that I have just really glommed onto and have become obsessed with, right? And so trying to, sort of like reclaim sex worker narratives and going back in history and finding Empress Theodora, right? Empress Wu, like these women who were able to, not just survive, right? Not just thrive, but lead, not in spite of, but because of their capacity to do sex work, because of their capacity and the spaces and the tools that opened up for them. And so, this is my show and the work that we do at Old Prose is a counter narrative, a celebration of sex workers in a way, like as experts, as valuable contributors to the communities and the spaces that we are already and will always be a part of.
Do you know what? Like we've talked on the show, I hate the idea of empowerment. I hate that we are supposed to justify our jobs as to whether they're empowering or not. But I feel so empowered right now. Like that's what. Thank you. Yeah, that's what these people have actually done for me. Like I feel, it's that,
you
not
are
in
proud
spite
of a long,
but because
long
of,
and proud legacy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
On every continent, That's,
in every, exactly. And that's what I often say with, I mean, obviously the oldest profession is a term that's means a lot to you. I'm not a historian, and I've always said I don't know if it is literally the oldest or like,
but definitely hunting for sure. Hunting.
Sure. But we know it's been around for a long fucking time, everywhere in all sorts of forms, and like that's what matters about it is that it's always been around, it always will be around, and it exists, and that's that.
We know that it's older than money, and one of my favorite like sort of like factoids, right? Like one of my like dinner party anecdotes, right? Or the thing that I want more moms to know, right? Is that I don't know, a decade ago, maybe it was 30 years ago. I'm getting older and time is weird, but like recent history, Yale spent, let's call it $1 million, right? Teaching captive monkeys what money is, right? And so they introduced these tokens in sort of like a closed system and taught the monkeys that they could exchange the tokens at like a little monkey store for things that they wanted, right? Like, grapes or pieces of cucumber or whatnot. And as soon as the concept clicked, the first thing that happened is that a boy monkey gave a girl monkey a token and then they had sex. It's the first thing. So
you adorable.
Can many claims about the exchange of erotic services for money, but unnatural is not one of them.
Yeah, love that. Just quickly circling back, am I correct in saying that you don't currently identify or consider yourself a current sex worker?
That is correct. I am not a criminalized sex worker. The work that I do, for sure. I employ the skills of sex work in almost everything that I do, right? Political fundraising, even, trying to change hearts and minds, right? It's all money for feelings, and it's all a seduction. And
so for you, sort of leaving the strictly being a sex worker industry was more about because you found a job in what you wanted to do.
I did. Yeah, I found a salaried position. I got married. I started an organization, and it it stopped making sense. And then it was sort of like outside of the agreements and life that I'm building with my partner. But it's something that I have no shame about. It's something I talk about all the time. It's impossible to introduce me at a party really without this coming up.
Yeah.
So it's and I think that because I am not actively a criminalized sex worker, and because I have access to all of this privilege, I'm able to kind of force those conversations from a position of strength and power. Yeah. Right. So inviting my, sex worker friends and family to my wedding, right? Introducing them to my, Baptist in-laws, bringing up the oldest profession at these family dinner parties and gatherings, and finding ways of talking about this that, makes it, okay for grandma. If that makes sense, in a very loving and open-hearted and sort of curious, isn't this neat way.
Yeah. Oh, it's our little whore friend.
Yeah. Isn't this neat? Yeah.
Can I just ask, kind of off topic, but in the Australian scene, in the advocacy scene, it is difficult to find people who are face out, or they may not even need to be face out, but who are open to speaking about their experiences, and understandably so, because stigma and discrimination is so fierce. I can only imagine that is so much more difficult living under a criminalized model. Is that accurate, do you think?
I am sure that that's true. Actually, no, I'm not. Here's the thing. I don't want any stolen valor, right? I didn't come out as a sex worker because I'm brave. I came out as a sex worker because I have this contrarian personality, right? Before I was telling stories about sex work, I was telling jokes about, poop jokes, right? Which were also inappropriate.
I could relate.
Yeah. Right. And I was able to do that, right, because of the incredible amount of privilege and confidence that I have that, I can fuck this up pretty hard and still be okay. I think that there are a lot of folks out there. There are folks with kids. There are folks with precarious living situations. There are folks that, the acceptance or non-acceptance of their community is a life or death question, right? That are not able to be face out in their community at this time for incredibly valid reasons that have nothing to do with bravery. And I can imagine, and again, this might be my arrogant US-ness coming. So if I'm just wrong about shit, please let me know. But
sure.
Australia is an island. It's harder to be the cost of being outed to your community. It's easier to be invisible in big, sprawling, urban environments. I'm sorry that we might want to cut this part. I know that Sydney's a real city, in the way that New York is. You know what I mean?
All right.
No,
it's not.
I don't mean
it's
to be
okay.
an asshole, but it's
we are our population density is out of control low. We understand that. It's okay.
So showing up to a council meeting, I mean, this is certainly something that we struggle with in Vermont and Maine and Oregon and places where folks are, making a living as a criminalized sex worker, and they're showing up to city council meetings to testify in front of legislators. Well, what happens when, that somebody recognizes that person the next time they're checking into a hotel? Yeah. What kind of harassment are they signing up for? And so I think it is a different question and a different calculus. And I think it would be different if I had to navigate my living through criminalized sex work. I don't know that I would be able to hold this public position with the same amount of like confidence that I do.
Absolutely.
But I think it's important for me to do that, to make it to go into spaces to make it easier for other sex workers to also be in those spaces. And what I have found is that like when you come out, other people also come out.
Yeah.
Right. So like, you know, and like we literally are already everywhere. Like everywhere. We're everywhere.
Yep. Yeah, all up in your business. I think, looking at the screen right now, it's very clear that the three of us have certain privileges that you know, take us a really long way. And that's something that is difficult in the advocacy space because we need to hear voices. We need to hear the voices of everyone. And as we know, the sex work industry is so broad and so diverse. But it's and I've struggled with this myself, and I've gone, do I need to shut up because I have a lot more privilege than so many others in the industry? And I've settled on I need to give space to that, but no, I don't need to shut up because I think
shutting up is the wrong move.
And I agree. That's why obviously the three of us we make podcasts, so we obviously all agree
it'd be super
on that.
weird if I was like, you know, you're right. We should quit.
We should stop. Just stop it. Yeah.
But I think it's important to know like. To know your audience, right? Like you definitely don't want to be explaining things to like you don't want to speak for people, right? And you don't want to speak over people. But like, you know, we go places where there aren't other sex worker advocates already. We're not really trying to take up space in places that sex workers already are. We're trying to break new ground, right? And so we've made it very clear at Old Pros, for example, like I love talking to sex workers. I love inspiring sex workers. I love that. But our primary audience are people who have never done this work, right? People who are persuadable but not yet persuaded that sex work is fine, maybe, you know?
Yeah. Or at the very least, as fine as any other job, you know?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's not perfect. None of them are.
I love that meme so much, which is just like, sex work is exploitation. You know what I'm talking about? The brain thing where it's like,
and then it explodes.
Work is bad. Like, yes, you get
That's what we're saying.
And it does break my heart. You know, I feel like sex work has taken up so much space as a symbol in like our communities all over the world that it's really prevented us from having deeper and better conversations about exploitation, right? Like, you know, the like coal miners don't think of themselves as exploited, or like the, you know, whole labor movements where it's like, you want to talk about selling your body. Like, I mean, this was, you know, my mom and I had kind of a cute moment recently, as I mentioned before, I'm an only child. And so that sort of meant that my parents had to like get on board with my choices or be alone for Christmas. So it was a real pressure campaign. And so we went to family therapy because that's what you do, and it's whatever.
God,
and so
I was so not open to that when my parents were dealing with it. I was like, no,
really?
You can just sort it out and get back to me.
Work it out yourself.
Figure it out. Yeah, I have hours and hours of content, so you guys can listen. But you know, no, we went to therapy.
Good on you.
And my mom blurted out, "I can't believe you sold your body." And I said, I didn't. I still have it. And the therapist laughed, and that's when I felt like I'd won.
And coming from somebody who made a child with somebody who was sent off to war.
Yeah. It's
like you want to talk about selling bodies? That's, yeah.
So it was, but you know, that's the narrative, right? That's the thing that we're pushing back against. And so sex workers, like this false narrative about what we do and what our work means seems like it really blots out, right? And like sucks all of the oxygen out in the room when we want to have real conversations about violent exploitation at work. We want to have conversations about sexual assault, right? But because we've conflated, right, too many things across too much time, it gets in the way of us being able to say what we mean.
Yeah. I think it's really sad. Like if I see an organization that is anti-trafficking or that is anti-exploitation, all of those things, they're things I support. You know, right. But I see that and I go, you're going to be anti-sex work. And
Right.
I'm not going to be able to have that conversation with you without that being a sticking point. So yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to take, feminist theorists or again, otherwise very smart people that are just like, what if we tried to arrest our way out of this problem again? Like, what if,
because it worked with the drugs. It
right?
works.
It's always
right?
gone so well.
Yes,
But I think so much of this, and I get a little weird because again we go way back in time, like Ishtar and Tlazolteotl and sort of like these ancient priestess prostitutes and the role that sex workers have always played in society. And so much of the work that we do is about shadow work, right? And like the release of shame. And so I think it's so interesting that there's so much projected onto us. We're holding so much for so many people, and we're otherized, and it's all coming from this place of people not being able or willing or having the capacity to face their own shame, right? We won't face the predators that live in our own house, right? We won't face the exploitation happening in our own communities, right? We want to pretend that it's happening over there, right? That it's sex workers or LGBT folks or immigrants or like any other demonized community, and it all intersects, right? And it all sort of like, compounds and swirls in these false narratives. And it really does feel like a multi-generational high stakes game of projection.
What a quote.
Thank you.
Depressing.
Yeah. You're both right. Sorry.
Yeah, correct. Goes, but yeah. I think that we could talk to you all night, Kaytlin, but it is past your bedtime where you live, and we'd better let you go. But thank you so much for sharing all of that with us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
We will obviously have links to old pros in the show notes.
Yeah, no, this has been a glorious conversation. Thank you so much. I think that like international solidarity on this is really important too. Like sex worker advocates, this has always been a global movement, right? Because it's like same shit everywhere we go. So it's lovely to be in conversation with you and to talk about the history of sex work. We do focus a lot on the U.S. That's
sure. We focus a lot in Australia. That's
see,
all
there
good.
you go.
Yeah.
That's But
yeah.
Thank you so much for having me and for facilitating this conversation.
Thank you. Talk soon.
Bye.
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 It's time to thank our stunning, amazing, gorgeous patrons. Our even more generous somebodies are Lachlan, Timmy, Steve, our footstool, James E., Scott C., our secret admirer, Andrew, Adam Smith, Leslie, Ellen, Sub London, Scott Watson,
Miss Billy, Nora Knightley, Andrew, Wheezy, Fritz Your Tits, Mr. E, Brandon, Simon, Alfie, Skippy, Greenie, Ophelia Parker, Aaron, Emily, Cobber, Nomad, and Maeve Harper.
and our extremely generous somebodies are Aaron, Pete, Andrew, Sienna Saint, Brino, Adam Moore, Wombat, Josh, and Sergio.
Thanks so much for joining us this week, guys. We obviously had a wonderful time. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did spending time with Kaytlin, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Please look out for us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Patreon. Our name everywhere is Somebody You Pod, as in podcast. Our Patreon starts at just $3 a month, and you can get all of our episodes ad-free and a day early, plus bonus episodes, behind-the-scenes action, bloopers, and more. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the voices of sex workers. And remember, somebody you love might just be a sex worker.